In the 21st century, the position of Gaelic in Scotland has become increasingly paradoxical. In terms of day-to-day community use, Gaelic is the weakest it has ever been, while the public status of the language and the level of institutional provision increase every year. This situation may well be unsustainable. With the revitalisation initiatives that began in the 1970s, accelerated in the 1980s, and solidified in the 21st century, Gaelic has come to play a much more prominent role in Scottish life than it has in many centuries. In symbolic terms, Gaelic has become an icon of nationhood in Scotland. In functional terms, the language is now embedded in national and local government and other important public institutions, visible in the linguistic landscape, and strongly present in the broadcast and digital media. Gaelic has widened its social base with the growth of Gaelic medium education and attracted a wide range of new speakers, all of whom find different kinds of appeal and meaning in the language. Most obviously in Glasgow, there can often be a sense of dynamism, cultural energy and optimism surrounding the language. This feeling could not be more different from the fatalism concerning the future of Gaelic that was so pervasive in the middle of the 20th century.
What was impressive about this book is that it grounds its review of the impact of policy and campaigners on the decline and then the revitalisation of Gaelic in drawing on a vast array of sources which chart the changing fortune of the language on different perspectives, looking at policy and legal context, but the role of media and sociolinguistics in this as well. It's a substantial study, but what made us kind of commend it to this extent is that it's also accessible and kind of remarkably readable for all of the scholarship that's gone into it.
Well, I'm delighted to be shortlisted for this award and to be recognised in this way. In particular, I feel it's important that research on Gaelic should be given this recognition and seen for its importance. Too often, unfortunately, Gaelic is an issue that is overly marginalised, and so I'm delighted that that this book is being recognised in this way. And I did intend this to be a useful book. It's perhaps not the most obvious page turner, but it's a book that I hope will be genuinely useful to a lot of readers, researchers, and people with only a limited interest perhaps in Gaelic, but to be able to get a solid basis for knowledge about where we are.
Over the course of a generation or so, the dead were brought into the cave. The bodies were mainly those of children who had already lain for a time elsewhere. Although the bodies had partially decayed, often missing parts of their hands and feet, they remained clothed or wrapped as mummy bundles. Some wore gold-covered rings in their hair that eventually dropped onto the cave floor, where they were absorbed into the accumulating deposits. At some point, someone gathered 6 of these hair rings together and, crossing the shallow pool of water, placed them carefully under a low overhang at the rear of the cave, perhaps as an offering to the spirits of the dead, or perhaps simply for safekeeping. But other objects remained where they fell, either in the entrance passages or trampled into the damp ground at the edge of the pool, where the passages gave way to the main body of the cave. Once in the cave, the bodies were not forgotten. People often made the journey to this isolated coastline, across Loch Spiny, to tend the dead, perhaps at particular predetermined times of year. Once the flesh had gone, some bones were polished clean and white, moved, grouped, and rearranged. These visits were neither brief nor mournful. Visitors brought food to prepare and cook in the entrance passages and under the entrance canopy. Perhaps these were special foods given to the ancestors, or perhaps they were meals for the living visitors to the cave.
In the centuries that followed, the cave lay mostly undisturbed, though it was not entirely forgotten. Occasional visitors carved crosses around the entrance walls, perhaps as a warning to a newly Christian society to stay away from this dangerous pagan place. Of course, people did continue to visit, sometimes to hide contraband, if we believe the author of The Curse engraved on the east wall of the cave interior in the 17th century, and in later centuries to add their own names to the fabric and history of this enigmatic place.
An extraordinary multidisciplinary scholarly book, which presents at this point the definitive study of this cave on the south coast of the Moray Firth, giving concrete and comprehensive examination of evidence to what might have been a sensational story, as the cave, which seems to have been uninhabited, was used for various purposes down the century, including burials and killings, It recounts the findings of a contemporary team of experts in different archaeological techniques who, building on and acknowledging previous scholarly work, have together re-examined over 1,000 objects.
Well, we're really thrilled and honoured to be shortlisted for the Research Book Award. I think it's testament not only to the amazing and meticulous work of the original excavators, who excavated the site with such care in difficult circumstances, but also to those people today who found their own kind of resonance or something so special about the Sculptor's Cave. That that resonance with past societies that also found reverence with this place, in so much that they laid their dead to rest and venerated the ancestors here for more than a millennium. And I think it's demonstrated that continued resonance with places like the Sculptor's Cave in the hearts and minds of people today. And really, it's just the latest episode in what is a very, very long biography for this enigmatic place.
From the main road, looking southeast across the great expanse of heathland vegetation, the Galson Moor may appear to be monotonous and unchanging, but venturing out onto this landscape with an open mind and an alert vision reveals an enormity of great and complex beauty. Standing on the slopes of Bendal, having made the strenuous effort to reach this landmark and looking back towards the three villages of Galson, is to sense a deep and overwhelming absorption into this landscape. If you think the Galson Moor looks endless when regarding it from the comfort of your car, it seems positively immense when you stand at the centre and look out towards the sea horizon. Only from your experience gained by walking those many kilometres over difficult bog, by retracing your route around the intricate network of lochans and marsh, stopping to examine these abandoned sheilings and to admire those rare and beautiful flowers, do you become aware that this land is not empty. It is simply invisible to those who cannot see.
The book that we found really just draws the reader in. I will also say at this point that the panel was unanimous in kind of commending the cover design. We all loved it. The book doesn't sentimentalize, and from this small place, from this sort of individual mind, asks us to reconsider landscape, collective memory, our view of what is remote. It's a personal, but also scholarly and erudite examination of place.
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, I was totally surprised. I think it's a huge honour even to get this far. I mean, looking through the back catalogue of books that were nominated and won in the past, there's some really impressive tomes and whatnot. And I just, one of the aims in this book, for me writing this book over about a year and a half, it took to bring this stuff together, was to encourage people to think about their own special place in a different way, but to look at that in terms of that broad swathe of history and that mix of humans and animals within the place and the relationship between us and the natural environment of that place. So it's wonderful that people who have nominated and who have selected this book to get onto the shortlist have appreciated that, and that to me is a huge reward in itself. So I'm really quite delighted.
The post-war depression of 1815 to 30 saw the winding down of the old Highland cattle economy, as well as the failure of the newer kelp and fishing industries, exposing the fragility of development schemes in peripheral areas, with desperate consequences for many Gaels. Meanwhile, the flood of southern visitors, whether tourists, sportsmen, geologists, or engineers, continued unabated, benefiting from a second transport revolution initiated by the Commission for Highland Roads and Bridges after 1803, including new canal construction and the rapid development of steamboat transport. Implemented by a reluctant government in response to lobbying from Highland magnates, these expensive projects sought to staunch emigration by providing employment at home. The commission was directed by the seasoned Scottish engineer, Thomas Telford, administratively supported by John Rickman and James Hope. Over the next quarter century, £1.5 million of public money would be spent on the project, establishing Telford as a national hero. a fit successor to General Wade and Coalfields.
The book marshals an extraordinarily wide range of resource and sources and a long period of research to consider the impact of these journeys and their descriptions on the travellers, as well as the local population, as well as the development of travel writing.
Well, I'm really, really delighted. I'm so honoured. It's a real privilege. I was very, very happy when I heard the news. It's been a big book. It's taken 8 years. It was 8 years in the making. Like all research books, it's very much, I'm the head guy, but there's been an enormous team involved. And I'd like to thank all my collaborators, particularly Marianne Constantine and the fellow investigators on the Curious Travellers project, which was generously funded by the AHRC from 2014 to 2018. And this book was one of the outputs of that. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Glasgow University, the School of Critical Studies, who gave me this a fantastic context and research context, a place to talk to people, to colleagues about the research. And I got an amazing steer from them. And also to all my Gaelic teachers who have put up with my struggling attempts to master the language. This what can be seen, which is in some ways a difficult language, but it's been one of the pleasures of researching this book, and I wouldn't have been able to write it without a knowledge of Gaelic. So lots of people involved. I'm delighted, but I'd like to thank everybody else as well.
In 1798, members of the United Irishmen were massacred by the British amid the crumbling walls of a half-built town near Waterford in Ireland. Many of the Irish were Republicans inspired by the French Revolution, and the site of their demise was known as Geneva Barracks. The barracks were the remnants of an experimental community called New Geneva, a settlement of Calvinist Republican rebels who fled the continent in 1782. The British believed that the rectitude and industriousness of these imported revolutionaries would have a positive effect on the Irish populace. The experiment was abandoned, however, after the Calvinists demanded greater independence and more state money for their project. The story is told of a utopian city inspired by a spirit of liberty and Republican values being turned into a place where Republicans who had fought for liberty were extinguished by the might of empire.
What was fascinating about this book is it took this sort of this small episode, until this book came out, this sort of like moderately under-researched episode in a global context, and led us all to sort of reassess the way in which we look at revolutionary episodes and question our response to revolutions that fail. So somehow quietly and with a great deal of archival research, that was balanced with this sense of sort of paradigm shifting possibility in this book.
It feels absolutely wonderful to be shortlisted, and it's a real honour. Writing in the genre of the history of ideas, sometimes it's seen to be a branch of history that's less accessible, let's say, than others, and therefore this kind of nomination is all the more appreciated, and it's a real honour and a privilege.